السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Thus far, we discussed the two types of missing links. The first is when the missing link is apparent, and the second is when it is hidden. If it is hidden, then according to Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, it's divided into two types. The first type is that if a person is quoting from a teacher who he did hear other narrations from, but he is quoting a narration which he did not hear from him. So this here, according to Ibn Hajar, is tadlis. And the second is al-mursal al-khafi, when a person is quoting from a contemporary who he did not meet. He didn't meet him at all, and Ibn Hajar rahmallah calls it mursalul khafi, but we have explained that no scholar before Ibn Hajar rahmallah would call it only mursalul khafi. And even the three codes which Ibn Hajar rahmallah presented, they are out of context. Now Ibn Hajar rahmallah is informing us that how can we know whether the narrator met the contemporary who he is quoting from or he did not meet him. So he says, ويعرف عدم الملاقاة بإخباره عن نفسه بذلك أو بجزم إمام مطلع, that we will know that a person did not meet from the one who is quoting from by him informing us himself. So he tells us that I quoted the Sheikh, but I didn't meet him. That's the one way. And the second way is bijazmi imam in muttali'in, or a imam who knows about it, an expert in the field. He is convinced and he informs us. So the first way he mentions is that the narrator clarifies or he informs us himself. So an example of this here is Hajjaj bin Artat. He would quote a lot of narrations from Imam Zuhri rahimahullah. So one day he told Hushaym, Ibn Abi Hatim rahimahullah narrates this in his Marasil. So he says that one day he told Hushaym that Sami'ta min az-Zuhri, did you have the opportunity of listening directly from Imam Zuhri? So Hushaym said yes. So then Hajjaj bin Artat said, Lakinni lam asma' minhu shay'an, but I have not heard anything directly from him. Yet he would narrate from Imam Zuhri rahmallah using the word an. So that means he made the least from Imam Zuhri rahimahullah. Now, when we say he made the least from Imam Zuhri rahimahullah, this is according to all scholars before Ibn Hajar rahmallah. According to Ibn Hajar rahmallah, he made irsalul khafi from Imam Zuhri rahimahullah because they were contemporaries, but he did not hear directly and he would quote him. So in this way, they would clarify or they would confess. And most of the time, this year would happen when they were asked. They would ask, did you hear from this particular sheikh? And then in response, they would answer and they would say that they did not hear directly. So this year, like we said, it's not very common. That it's very seldom that a person would actually mention it. Firstly, for the students to ask the teacher that you're quoting from the sheikh, did you actually hear from him? They wouldn't do that very often. And it was very seldom that a sheikh would actually also confess to it. So it did happen that, and we just gave an example of it, that they would mention it themselves, but that is a very few times. Most of the times we come to know bijazmi imam in muttali'in, that an imam, an expert in the field, he's absolutely convinced that this particular narrator did not hear from the person who is quoting from. So in this example which we have given, this previous example of Hajjaj bin Artat, so we saw there he mentioned, Lakinni lam asma' minhu shay'an. So we can even give it as an example of this year. Abdullah bin Mubarak, rahmallah, he mentioned what regards to this, and it comes in Sahih ibn Khuzaymah. حدثنا الحسين بن مهدي قال حدثنا عبد الرزاق قال أخبرنا ابن المبارك قال الحجاج بن أرطاط لم يسمع من الزهري شيئا. So you can see here, it's Imam Abdullah bin Mubarak, he's the Imam, and he is telling us, and he's mentioning it with absolute confidence, he's with absolute conviction. He is totally confident that Hajjaj definitely did not meet Imam Zuhri. Mullah al-Qari rahmallah gives another example, and to quote it because we'll have to come back to it also. Ibn Salah rahmallah also mentions this example. So Mullah al-Qari mentions it that Ḥadīth al-Awwam, like Awam bin Hawshab, he narrates from Abdullah ibn Abi Awfa that Nabi sallallahu كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا قال بلال قد قامت الصلاة نهض وكبر. So you know in Turkey, if any of you went to Turkey, that when Imam is still saying when the Muaddin is still saying قد قامت الصلاة, they already start the Salah. So you can see that he uses this. This is one of the dalils for it. So Imam Ahmad rahmallah said, Al-Awam lam yudrik ibn Abi Awfa, that Awam did not meet Ibn Abi Awfa. So in this case, we can understand that there is inqita' in the sanad, there is a missing a link. Now this here is the most common way of knowing that narrator did not meet the one who he is quoting from. But now the question arises that if he did not confess, then how can that Imam know? That Imam obviously is not alimul ghaib. So how would he know that sometimes a person might not even meet a sheikh in his own locality? And those of you who travel to meet other shuyukh, you would know how common this here is. In fact, I can give you an example from every country. When we went to Amman, then we asked people about Sheikh Shuaib Arnaout, rahmallah, 2 streets away, and they don't even know who he was. Likewise, when we went, in fact, Sheikh Nuruddin Itr himself, when we were in Damascus, literally one street, and then there was a small bend. We're asking because now you know you're going in you're going, and the taxi drivers obviously don't know where you want to go, so you have to navigate yourself. So we're going there and we're trying to figure out. We ask just a few meters away, and they don't even know who he was. So like that, sometimes a person might not know a sheikh in his own locality. And Sheikh Ibrahim Lahim, he mentions this here. وقد يكون الراويان في بلد واحد أو في بلدان مختلفة وقد يكون مع ذلك رآه أو ربما جالسه. Maybe they lived in the same city, they would meet maybe, but he never actually or formally took a hadith from that person. And then he even gives an example. So this example is narrated Imam Ahmad rahmallah in Al-Ilal wa Ma'rifat al-Rijal of Sufyan bin Uyayna rahmallah, that Sufyan bin Uyayna said that وَقَدْ رَأَيْتُهُ وَلَمْ أَسْمَعْ مِنْهُ, I saw him, but I never heard any narrations from him. So this here also happens so common that you meet a sheikh, but you don't take hadith from him. So the answer to this is that these imams, they would look at qara'in. So you remember, it's the imams, these experts in the field. Because if another person is to look at the qara'in, these external factors, a whole lot of different factors, then they would maybe make a mistake. But the imam, he would look. So maybe at times, like he would look at the locations. At other times, maybe he would inspect the general teachers of this particular narrator. That this person is generally narrating from all junior narrators. And now he's narrating from a particular sheikh who is quite old. So like that, various different factors they would have. In fact, Sheikh Ibrahim Lahim says, وَهُنَاكَ قَرَائِنْ خَاصَّةً قَدْ تُوجَدْ فِي الرَّاوِي الْمُعَيَّنِ. Sometimes there is specified things just to look at a particular rawi. That for a particular rawi, there are specified factors which scholars would inspect, and then they would inform us that this person did not meet the one who he is quoting from. And even if there was no qarina, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would make it apparent, because obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it was his duty to preserve deen. So he would make it apparent. And you know, we quoted that statement of Imam Zahabi rahmallah, وأما سرقة السماء والدعاء ما لم يسمع من الكتب والأجزاء فهذا كذب مجرد ليس من الكذب على الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم بل من الكذب على الشيوخ ولن يفلح من تعاناه وقل من ستره الله عليه منهم فمنهم من يفتضح في حياته ومنهم من يفتضح بعد وفاته فنسأل الله الستر والعفو. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would expose the person that he's trying to act like he's a student of a particular sheikh, or he's trying to give the impression that he heard from a particular sheikh, when in reality, that's obviously if he done it with ulterior motives. So although we're mentioning of the past scholars that they would use these different types of qara'in. Now in our case, for us, when we have to, if we find a narration, now what happens if we find a narration And we find contradictory views among some scholars. So some scholars would say that this particular narrator heard from that sheikh, and others would say no, he did not hear. So in that case, we also would have to apply those qara'in. But obviously, it's after you get experience in the field, and once you go through all the different books on tariq, then you can apply all of these different factors. So these are the two methods which Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned. He now clarifies that a person cannot just take now two chains. So you have one sanad and say maybe in this sanad there are 5 narrators, and in another sanad there are 4 narrators. So you cannot now like compare these two chains and then say that look, in this one chain there's one missing link. So maybe when this particular narrator is narrating it, he's making tadlis. You cannot come to that conclusion just by inspecting two chains. One chain is shorter, one chain is longer, and now by default, automatically you assume that there's a shorter, there is tadlis in the shorter chain. So he says, ولا يكفي أن يقع في بعض الطرق زيادة راو بينهما لاحتمال أن يكون من المزيد ولا يحكم في هذه الصورة بحكم كلي لتعارض احتمال الاتصال والانقطاع. وقد صنف فيه الخطيب كتاب التفصيل لمبهم المراسيل وكتاب المزيد في متصل الأسانيد. So he's saying that it's not sufficient that in some different chains you have an additional rawi, and in some nuskhas it comes akthar bainahum. So in our nuskha here it comes ziyadatu rawin, in some nuskhas it comes akthar. So maybe there's one additional narrator or many additional narrators, and because of that you assume that the shorter there's at least in the shorter chain. Why is it not possible? لاحتمال أن يكون من المزيد. So the chain with the additional narrator will go under the category of Mazid fi Muttasil al-Asanid. There's a chapter, specific chapter which is coming with regards to this Al-Mazid fi Muttasil al-Asanid. It's a few pages later on page 95. But for now, you can just check in the footnote. Sheikh Nuruddin said, وَهُوَ أَن يَزِيدَ رَاوٍ فِي الْإِسْنَادِ الْمُتَّصِلِ رَجُلًا لَمْ يَذْكُرْهُ غَيْرُهُ. That all other students, so remember again, it's all from one sheikh this year, and then the remaining sanad is the same. So all the other students are narrating it that this sheikh, when he narrated it, then between him and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there are 4 narrators, but then there's one student come, and when he narrates 5 narrators. So an example of this here, Sheikh Nuruddin gives it, but we'll go back directly to the source. So if you look in Ilal al-Kabir of Imam Tirmidhi rahmallah, he narrates with his sanad, Muhammad bin Bashar, and then it goes, عن الزهري. Okay, we have to say this whole sanad because we're going to come. So it's حدثنا محمد بن بشار قال حدثنا وهب بن جرير قال حدثنا أبيه. That means from Jarir. So remember you have Jarir here. عن ابن إسحاق عن الزهري عن عمر بن عبد العزيز عن الربيع بن صبرة عن أبيه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم نهى عن المتعة يوم الفتح. So this is the narration and that's the sanad. So you can see in the sanad Ibn Ishaq is narrating from Zuhri, who's narrating from Umar bin Abdul Aziz. So Imam Tirmidhi then said that I asked Imam Bukhari rahmallah with regards to this, and Imam Bukhari rahmallah said هذا حديث خطأ, that there's a mistake here. والصحيح عن الزهري عن الربيع بن صبرة عن أبيه ليس فيه عمر بن عبد العزيز وإنما أتى هذا الخطأ من جرير بن حازم. So Jarir is the one who made the mistake. So in منهج النقد شيخ نور الدين says ولعل سبب الخط ما ورد أن زهري سمع الحديث من الربيع عند عمر بن عبد العزيز فظنه جرير من رواية الزهري عن عمر بن عبد العزيز عن الربيع. والحديث روي من عدة أوجه عند مسلم وأحمد عن الزهري عن الربيع ليس فيها ذكر عمر بن عبد العزيز. Now a point to clarify here is that if some students who are narrating the longer chain, if they have to narrate it with words which indicate to sama'a, so they are saying that he's using the word حدثنا or سمعنا or أخبرنا, that's in a longer chain. And then those students who are narrating with the shorter chain, if they are using with words which do not denote upon sama'a, so they are just using qala or an, then in that case, there is a possibility that we can assume that there is tadlis in the second chain, because in the first chain, it's total ittisal with sama, so it's mentioning that he heard it from that person. But now in the second chain, he's just using the word an and is leaving out one link and narrating from above. So in that case, we can assume that there is tadlis. And this is, I told you that Sheikh Ibn Hajar is going to discuss it a few pages later on page 95. So he mentions it on page 95. وشرط يقع التصريح بالسماع في موضع الزيادة وإلا فمتى كان معنعنا مثلا ترجحت الزيادة. That's what he mentioned. Obviously, we'll discuss it in more detail, inshallah, when we reach there. But he's saying that فمتى كان معنعنا, when it's narrated with the word an, then you are giving preference to that additional narrator. So that means you are giving preference to that longer sanad, which means that the shorter sanad, there is the least in it and there is a missing link in it, and therefore it falls under this whole category of mardud. Al-Malaqani rahmallah also discusses the whole thing at the end. He said, وَالصَّوَابُ أَنَّ مَا كَانَتْ صيغة الأداء فيه ليست صريحة في الاتصال ليس من النوع الملقب بالمزيد في متصل الأسانيد. So that was the point which I wanted to clarify. But now let us go back to this example which we just gave from Ilal Tirmidhi. Let's go back to the sanad. So it comes there. حدثنا وهب بن جرير قال حدثنا أبيه. Now look after this. عن ابن إسحاق عن الزهري عن عمر بن عبد العزيز. So here it's narrated with the word عن الربيع بن سبورة. So it's narrated with the word عن. So this here is that, to show you that there is no hard and fast rule, and therefore Ibn Hajar rahmallah now clarifies this, and he says that there is no standard ruling. ولا يحكم في هذه الصورة بحكم كلي لتعارض احتمال الاتصال والانقطاع. There can be no standard ruling, because at times you will have to give preference to the longer chain, at times you will have to give preference to the shorter chain. When he mentions here بحكم كلي, then Sheikh Rahili says that in the Hashia of one of the makhtuts, it's written there jazimin, that you cannot be, there is no firm ruling which you can pass on this here. Each case will have to be evaluated independently, and that is why we need to rely as much as possible on the verdicts of previous scholars. And if we need to look at qara'in, then we first need to do lots and lots of reading with understanding and get experience ourselves. Otherwise, we cannot just take two narrations, see that the one sanad is shorter, the other one is longer, and then conclude that there is at least, rather there is much more to look at. Now he says, وقد صنف فيه الخطيب كتاب التفصيل لمبهم المراسيل وكتاب المزيد في متصل الأسانيد. So unfortunately, both these books of Ulama Khatib rahmallah, according to what we know at present. So this here is, whenever you have to mention that the book is mafkud, you must qualify it like this here, according to what we know at present, because there are still many libraries and museums actually also, universities which have books preserved. Probably maybe after 5 years, someone would go and actually make a concerted effort to look for this book, and he might find it. Those of you who've been to Turkey, you know how many libraries there are, even in Syria, even in Jordan, even in Palestine, so many libraries, Iraq also, so many libraries. So you can imagine that probably from the 175,000 kitabs, it's hidden away somewhere, and someone will find it. So that's why we say that according to what we know at present, that this book is mafqud, it's not available. Sheikh Ibrahim al-Lahim said, وَكِلَاهُمَا لَا وُجُودَ لَهُ الْآن. So with regards to the first book, At-Tafsil Mubham al-Marasil, Mullah Ali Qari rahmallah explains that this book is with regards to Mursalul Khafi. So when Ibn Hajar is saying, Mullah Ali Qari said, فَصَنَّفَ فِي خَفِيِّ الْإِرْسَالِ. So it means it's referring to Mursalul Khafi. So when Sheikh Ibn Hajar said, وَقَدْ صَنَّفَ فِيهِ الْخَطِيب, then it, the marja of that zamir goes back to Mursalul Khafi. That with regards to the chapter of Irsalul Khafi, Alama Khatib wrote this kitab, At-Tafsil Limubham al-Marasil. But now remember again what we discussed in the last lesson, that Alama Khatib rahmallah did not divide the missing link like how Ibn Hajar rahmallah divided it. He did not, or the hidden link, the hidden missing link. He didn't divide it like how Ibn Hajar rahmallah divided it. And you remember the clear statement we have that under the definition of the this, he said, والمدلس رواية المحدث عمن عاصره ولم يلقه فيتوهم أنه سمعه أنه سمع منه. So that's he's clearly mentioned it in Al-Kifaya that it falls under the category of tadlis. But now Ibn Hajar is saying that he wrote an entire kitab on the siyah. So although we don't have the kitab, Ibn Salah rahmallah had the kitab, and it does seem like he did cover a few aspects here which Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned, because Alama Ibn Salah rahmallah, he brought a chapter Ma'arifatul Marasil al-Khafih Irsaluha. So he brought this here on page 289, and he mentions هذا نوع مهم عظيم الفائدة. And then he says that Walil Khatib that Alama Khatib وللخطيب الحافظ فيه كتاب التفسير لمبهم المراسيل. So he's mentioning there that Alama Khatib has this kitab. And then he's saying والمذكور في هذا الباب منه ما عرف فيه الإرسال بمعرفة عدم السماع من الراوي فيه أو عدم اللقاء. So here you can see that it covers what Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned as Mursal al-Khafi, that if a person didn't meet or he didn't take narrations from the teacher or the one who is quoting. And then he gives that example which we mentioned in the beginning, which I told you we're going to discuss from Mullah al-Qari of Awab bin Hawshab. Thereafter he said that additional things which Alama Khatib ومنه ما كان الحكم بإرساله محالا على مجيئه من وجه آخر. So exactly what Ibn Hajar mentioned here above. بزيادة شخص واحد أو أكثر في الموضع المدعى فيه الإرسال. So this here also gives us more insight on how Ibn Hajar rahmallah divided these two. That you remember that he said وكلام الخطيب في الكفاية. Had he not added those words في الكفاية, then we would have been able to give him the benefit of this doubt and say that probably Ibn Hajar had this kitab, and because he had this kitab, therefore he's attributing it to Alama Khatib rahmallah. But because he added the word fil kifaya, وكلام الخطيب في الكفاية, and you remember in the last lesson also I quoted to you from Nukat. In Nukat he also quoted from Al-Kifaya exactly which text he was referring to. So therefore we could say that he missed out this text in the beginning. But had he not mentioned the word fil kifaya, we would have now assumed that probably he got his whole division from Alama Khatib rahmallah. But even if he did get the division from Alama Khatib, we just quoted now that Alama Khatib put what Ibn Hajar mentioned as Mursalul Khafi, those exact same words, or that exact same definition, Alama Khatib gave it as a definition of tadlis. So probably Alama Khatib used both terms interchangeably, but Ibn Hajar rahmallah specified the one term here, and like I explained that he was the first to do this. So that's with regards to the first book. Then with regards to the second book, Al-Mazid fi Muttasil al-Asanid. So obviously you can know what the context are from the name. You must remember Ibn Salah rahmallah also, he got most of these definitions or these titles or these terminologies rather. He got most of these terminologies from Alama Khatib. So Alama Khatib is the one who actually gave all these different names to these various categories. So therefore he called his book Al-Mazid fi Muttasil al-Asanid. Again, like we said, that it's not available. But again, Ibn Salah rahmallah had a copy of it, and that is how he could comment on it. That just before this chapter of Mursal al-Khafi, he said that وَفِي كَثِيرٍ مِمَّا ذَكَرَهُ نَظَرٌ. In majority of what so he's making تعقب on Alama Khatib, on based on what he wrote in this kitab. And thereafter he explains لأن الإسناد الخالي عن الراوي الزاهد إن كان بلفظة عن في ذلك فينبغي أن يحكم إرساله. Obviously we'll discuss that masala later, but the point here to show is that he could only make تعقب on Alama Khatib rahimahullah if he had the book. So he had the book and he made ta'aqub, he refuted him on some of what he mentioned. So all this here now brings us to the end of the first type of rejected narrations. And the first type was when a weakness comes about because of a missing link. Ibn Hajar says, one tahat, and in some books it comes waqadin tahat. The word qad comes, so but in our nusra, one tahat huna aqsamu hukm as-saqit min al-isnad. He now moves on to discuss the second type, and that is where there is an issue with the integrity and with the reliability of the narrator. So you remember, again, the point to always keep in mind is his tartib of the kitab, the order, because in the beginning he mentioned that he's coming up with this new order. So you saw now how he's putting it in this kind of an order that he just now completed mentioning when the weakness comes about because of a missing link. And now he's going to be discussing when the weakness comes about because of a defect in the narrator. So he says, ثم الطعن يكون بعشرة أشياء بعضها أشد في القرح من بعض خمسة منها تتعلق بالعدالة وخمسة تتعلق بالضبط. So he's saying that use the word ثم الطعن. Now what's the meaning of طعن? It means a defamation. It comes from the word طعن يطعن طعنا. You say طعنانا. And it's a person that فلان طعان is وقاع في أعراض الناس بالذم والغيبة ونحوهما. That when a person always attacks the integrity of another person, whether it's done on face or whether it's done behind his back. لما لقاني رحمه الله in قضاء الوتر, he says من طعن يطعن كمنع يمنع. It comes from that bab. إذا قرح في النسب أو العرض أو المروة, when you're always criticizing someone, whether, like we said, whether it's in front of him or whether it is behind him. And it is in that meaning that, you know, the narration which you done in Tirmidhi, Imam Tirmidhi rahmallah quoted with his sanad, that قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ليس المؤمن بالطعان ولا اللعان ولا الفاحش ولا البذيء. And Imam Tirmidhi said حسن غريب. So it comes in that meaning. So here when we talk of طعن, Sheikh Khudair, he says والمراد بالطعن هنا جرح الراوي باللسان والتكلم فيه من ناحية عدالته ودينه. That when you are criticizing the narrator in Riyadh al-Salihin, you done that obviously to criticize the narrator because of this year is 100% fine. There is no ghiba involved. Neither is it buhtan. Obviously, the person's intention has to be clear, but this year is not considered as a ghiba, and you done the whole long explanation of it in Riyadh al-Salihin. So he says, ثم الطعن يكون بعشرة أشياء. There are 10 different things which could impact a person's integrity, or which could impact a person. 5 of it deals with a person's integrity, and 5 of it deals with a person's dhabt. So the 5 which deals with a person's integrity, it's lying. So when he's clearly known as a liar, so obviously now he's no more regarded as an honest person, or he's accused of lying, or his so it's kizb, tuhmatul kizb, or fisq if he's known to be a sinner, wal jahala, or if he's unknown, wal bid'ah, or if he does innovations. So these are the 5 with regards to which impacts a person's integrity. وخمسة تتعلق بالضبط. And then there are 5 which deal with the accuracy and the precision of the narrator, that how accurate was he to preserve the narration. So these depends on the memory and the retentive skills of the narrator. And it also depends on how he preserved the book if he wrote down narrations. So in that you get fuhshul ghalat, when a person makes a lot of mistakes, wal ghafla, when a person is just negligent, wal wahm, wal mukhalafa, and wasu'ul hifz. So these are 5. But Ibn Hajar rahmallah says that he's not going to discuss it in this tartib. That firstly the 5 which deals with a person's integrity, and then the 5 which deals with a person's dhab. Rather, he's changing the order. So he's going to discuss it all in detail, but he's going to change the order. So he says, ولم يحصل الاعتناء بتمييز أحد القسمين من الآخر لمصلحة اقتضت ذلك. He said because that of some nasliha, he has there's some wisdom and some goodness in not putting it in that order of explaining it in that order. Rather, he will change the order. So he says that وهي ترتيبها على الأشد فالأشد في موجب الرد على سبيل التدلي. So he says that rather than mentioning the 5 points which are related to the integrity first, and then the 5 points which pertains to the memory thereafter, he feels that he's going to now discuss it in terms of which is the most severe. So he says the most severe will be mentioned. The worst of all narrations will be first. Thereafter that which has less severity than less, until the 10th one is that which is not so severe. So here when he says al-ashad, fal-ashad, it's at-tanazzul min al-a'la fi shidda ila al-adna fiha. This is what Mullah al-Qari says, that from the most severe, the worst. This is why purposefully I'm using the word worst to show you, like the lowest of the low. He's going to discuss that first, and thereafter he's going to discuss that which is a bit slightly stronger. So, but then the Shia raised an objection. So he said, قيل وهذا لا يخلو من استدراك لانفهامه من الأشد فالأشد. That the way a person could understand that the words al-ashad fal-ashad, it means that first he's going to discuss something which is bad. Fal-ashad, so that fal-ashad means that after that he will discuss what is more worse. So the meaning a person could get from this is that he's going to discuss the lightest one first, and thereafter what's more severe, then the one which is more severe, until the 10th one is the worst. But Ibn Hajar actually, because we can see how he mentions it here after, so he actually intends the other way. So Allama Munawi rahmallah said that وَقَالَ بَعْضُهُمْ وَلَوْ قَالَ الْأَشَدْ فَالشَّدِيدِ لَكَانَ أَنْسَبَ. Had he mentioned it in this way, that first you will discuss the al-ashad, so he's using it as a ism tafdil, in a superlative, and then fashadid, and thereafter that which is a bit lighter, lakana ansab, it would have been more better. But Mullah al-Qari rahmallah said that وفيه أن العبارة محتملة لأن يكون للترقي وللتدلي. The both meanings could be taken, and from the context you can understand that his actual intent is to discuss the worst first and thereafter. So here he's changing the order. Instead of putting the 5 and 5, it makes sense for him to present the order like this here, because remember his objective is for a student. So Kamal bin Abi Sharif mentions, quoted from Yawaqit wa Durar, that فَإِنَّ تَرْتِيبَهَا عَلَى الْأَشَدْ فَمَا دُونَهَا أَكْثَرْ نَفْعًا. There is more benefit in this here. Because now you can know that these narrations are the worst, that they are, you know exactly in which category they fall. وأعظم فائدة من تمييز أحد القسمين على الآخر سيما للمبتدئ مع أنه يمكن أن يستخرجه الطالب إذا تأمله. And if you want to, any student, and every student can use his intellect and can understand which pertain to the person's integrity and which pertains to the person's dhabt. So therefore, it was more wise for Ibn Hajar rahmallah to mention it like this. So now Ibn Hajar rahmallah is first going to give an overview, or what you can maybe call an introduction, call it an overview. He's first going to mention the 10 points, and then he will elaborate on each one of them. Inshallah, we will discuss them in the next lesson. Until then, jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.